All right, so we are going to get started with our curriculum design workshop for the critical media literacy in the network world. To help get us started, this is going to be our agenda for today. We're going to start with going over curriculum development. What is curriculum development? Then we're going to touch on curriculum planning. How do we plan a curriculum? We'll go into curriculum design and the different models of curriculum design. And we'll wrap up with going a little in depth into learning outcomes and how can we formulate effective learning outcomes. To help frame this workshop, we're thinking of critical media literacy as a way to encourage interaction with media through a framework which will critically examine representations, systems, structures, ideologies, and power dynamics that shape and are reproduced throughout culture and society. Now, CML is an inquiry-based process, right? It allows and promotes analyzing and creation of media through the unpacking and complicating of said media, right? In those interconnected notions of power and knowledge dynamics. So who has the power to create particular ways we see, know, and understand the world, ourselves, and others? Pedagogically, CML is going to question normative representations of those intersections of identity, and it's going to further challenge the reproduction of messages that promote oppression and discrimination. CML will promote positive, multifaceted representations while making clear the benefits that media has, while also challenging and critiquing it as never neutral, right? So it's a pedagogy of transformation that's meant to develop and empower critical, caring, nurturing, and conscientious people. This is pulled from Critical Media Project. To get started, what is curriculum development? So curriculum development, the way we understand and theorize curriculum has changed significantly over the years, right? So today we know it simply as the subjects that make up a course of study at schools or universities or colleges. However, the word curriculum has its roots in Latin, right? And it's originally meant racing chariot and came from the verb carrere, which is to run. So curriculum development, we can think of also as course planning or course development. It is synonymous with that. It's important that we recognize the differences that course design or that exists within course design. Now, a math course taken at one university might cover the same material, but the educator might teach it in a different way, right? But however, the core fundamentals of curriculum development are going to remain the same. So even if the way that one company has set up their employee training and continuing education within the company, another company who sells the same type of products might go about it very, very different, right? They might train their employees using different standards or might implement the teaching in a different way. Now, current curriculum can be broken down into two broad categories. This includes the product category, which is going to be results oriented, right? So they are focused on, say, if we're thinking in education, a lot of my examples are going to be from an education perspective because I'm a teacher. Product categories being result oriented. As a teacher, that would mean grades are my primary objective, right? My focus is lying more on the finished product rather than the learning process, how they're getting to the answer. Where the process category is going to focus on how learning is developing over a period of time. It's a much more open-ended process or category. Now, these two categories need to be taken into account when you are developing your curriculum. What is going to be your goal? Now we're into planning. What is curriculum planning? Curriculum planning involves implementing different instructional strategies and organizational methods that are focused on achieving optimal development and learning outcomes. That could be for students or your employees or team members that are reporting to you. Now, instructors might structure their curriculum around a daily lesson plan, a specific assignment, a particular unit or chunk of coursework, certain units within a class, or even an entire program. If we're thinking of in a business, this could mean You are structuring your curriculum around a certain product. You are structuring your curriculum around a certain issue that has arose, like a repeated issue that keeps popping up in your team. It could also be that you are planning curriculum for a specific like professional development topic. Now, educators want to employ the curriculum process that best incorporates the 6 components of effective teaching. Now, these are applicable on any education level as well as in the mind of a business, right? This includes having an ability to demonstrate knowledge of content, right? You want to make sure that you have a grip on what you are teaching or you want them to learn. If you don't know the content, well, how are you supposed to then teach them the content? You want to make sure you know your audience, right? Make sure that you have a knowledge of who is going to be participating in this learning experience. You then want to make sure that you are selecting suitable instructional strategy goals, right? Make sure that they are attainable, measurable goals, and that they're also something that you will be able to see, right? And that they can transfer. You want to make sure that you demonstrate a knowledge of the resources that you're going to be using, right? If you are going to bring in pieces of media, you want to make sure you have a clear understanding of that piece of media, why it is important to this unit, and what does it add for them, right? How does it contribute to their learning? You want to make sure that you design coherent instruction, right? Make sure that it all flows and is connected and builds on the thing that comes before. Lastly, you want to provide opportunities for them to apply their knowledge so that you can assess student learning. Now, what is curriculum design? Curriculum design is the deliberate organization of course activities and delivery within a learning space. We're going to discuss, we've covered, right, curriculum development and planning, but now we're going to cover design. When you are thinking of higher ed instructors, right, designing their curriculum, they might identify learning objectives. They're going to make sure that they have timely and relevant bridges. They're going to make sure they identify course content and readings, right? Things that are going to supplement the unit, support it, keep it flowing. And they're also going to identify activities and markers for success. So this can be both low and high stakes assessments. Now you want to remember that the curriculum contains the knowledge and skills that they are going to need to master in order to move to the next level, whatever that next level might be. By thinking about how their curriculum is designed, you are ensuring that they've covered all of the necessary requirements. You're making sure that you're building in those prerequisites if needed for whatever the next step is. Then from there, you want to start exploring the many different approaches and teaching methods that can help them to achieve their goals. Now, what are 3 models of, also, I do want to point this out. This is just an infographic that shows some of the tools that you can use to help as you are designing your curriculum. You can pull from students themselves, right? Who are your participants going to be, their input, the educators who are going to deliver the instruction, or employer feedback, right? Or employee feedback if you're not using students. Retention rates, how many students or how many employees have been leaving, right? Employment rates, who's coming in. You want to do an environmental scan. What's the culture feeling like? Forecasting their skills and abilities. What are they already coming into the sessions with? And you can use something like a curriculum map, which we'll talk about later, to help you support your design process. All right, so what are 3 models of curriculum design? Well, first you have a subject-centered curriculum, which is going to revolve around a particular subject matter or discipline like mathematics, literature, or biology, right? This model of curriculum tends to focus on the subject rather than the student and is the most common model of standardized curriculum in K-12 schools. Teachers compile lists of subjects, specific examples on how they should be studied, and then in higher education, this methodology is typically found in large universities or college classes, right, where the teachers focus on one subject or discipline, right? Teachers compile these lists of subjects, they give specific examples on how they should be studied, and then in higher education, Um, oh, sorry, I thought I remember that. So student subject-centered curriculum design is not student-centered, right? It's less concerned with individual learning styles compared to other forms of curriculum. This might lead to problems with student engagement and motivation, typically because students who are not responsive tend to fall behind. The next type of curriculum design is learner-centered, right? So by contrast, it's going to revolve around the student needs, their interests, their goals. It's going to acknowledge that the students aren't uniform, but they're individuals. So they should not, in most cases, be subject to standardized curriculum, right? There needs to be moments where we tend to the student where they are. This approach is going to empower learners to shape their education through choices. Now, differentiated instructional plans provide opportunities to select assignments, teaching and learning experiences, or activities that are timely and relevant. Differentiation is what we call it when we meet the student where they are, right? So all students might be expected to be here, but you have some here, you're going to differentiate to meet the student or learner that is here. Now, it's going to definitely show more engagement and motivation for students because it's something that is going to bring them in where they are. The drawback, though, is that this form of curriculum design, it creates pressures to form content around learning needs and preferences for students. Differentiation is not easy. It can be very difficult to differentiate and scaffold instruction. So insights can be challenging to glean in a largely online environment. Balancing your individual student interests with the course's required outcomes could prove to be daunting, but you want to take the time and consult with what you know about your learners, what your educator or the person that is going to be the professional instructor for your unit, which will be you. You want to make sure that you are knowing your students. That will help you, right, in providing that differentiation because you're going to know where they are coming in. That's why that step is very important. Now, the last thing or type of design is a problem-centered curriculum design, where it teaches students how to look at a problem and then formulate a solution. Now, the problem-centered curriculum is going to help students engage in authentic learning, right? Because they're looking to expose real life issues and skills, which are then going to be transferable to the real world. Now, problem-centered curriculum design is shown to increase the relevance of the curriculum, which by result is going to encourage creativity, innovation, collaboration. The drawback, however, is that individual needs and interests aren't always going to be able to be accounted for. As you are going through your curriculum design, you want to consider all three models before you begin planning. Choose a model that is best suited to your learners and the type of course that you are going to give. I've listed the theoretical frameworks because I want us to have a little bit of idea on how curriculum theory plays into some of these elements because I am a curriculum theorist in training. So for subject-centered curriculum design, as we see, it is not focused on the student, more so focused on the results. It is a theoretical framework that aligns with the positivist view, which is typically the view of the K-12 schooling system. The idea that we know and we're going to then bring you into the know. Now, learning-centered curriculum design aligns more with an interpretivist point of view, right? We are co-creating this learning environment together. And problem-centered curriculum design, of course, is going to fall with a critical theoretical framework, right? Because it is the questioning of the thing, bringing it into the forefront, complicating it, and understanding it. All right, lastly, now this part is going to be a little bit heavy. Stay with me if you can, take a couple breaks. All right, so we're gonna go over the methods of constructing learning outcomes. And with this section, we're thinking about not only the steps that we can take to build our lesson, but also what is the end, right? We're thinking with the end in mind. Now, before we get started on how to build the learning objectives, what is a learning objective or a learning outcome? Learning outcomes are descriptions of the abilities, skills, and knowledge that are used for assessing student learning. So these learning outcomes need to outline what students possess and can demonstrate upon completion of a learning experience or set of experiences. For this case, you're doing one unit. So what can they get by the end of the unit? What can they possess? What can they demonstrate? When you develop your list of student learning outcomes, you want to set curriculum objectives that improve student learning. To do that, you want to consider the following. First, you want to choose between 3 to 5 outcomes that are straightforward, right? Now, 3 to 5, you want to choose a sufficient amount of learning outcomes to ensure that their progress can be measured without becoming overly complicated for you to assess. Also worthwhile to point out that not all educational activities will assess all learning outcomes, right? So each educational activity can assess the student's development and comprehension, focusing on maybe only 1 or 2 learning objectives for each class. Less than 3 objectives likely mean that student learning objectives are not robust enough for an entire course. So they should be straightforward and identify and describe your plan, right? Being concise, simple. You want to avoid phrasing or compound statements that mesh together more than one statement, right? That way you're communicating effectively to your learners. Each learning outcome, you want to focus on the development of one skill or the meeting of one goal in order to be straightforward and ensure effective learning. Next thing you want to do, you want to make sure that you express these learning outcomes in the future tense. It is very important. It's very important for the proper implementation of student learning outcomes that they're expressed in the future tense. That statement should express what they should be able to do as a result of specific instruction, right, or educational activity. So your outcomes should involve active learning and be observable so that they can be quantified by examining key student success through the learning assessment. You want to make sure that they create and use information literacy skills, right? Make use of critical media literacy skills as well. Next, your learning outcomes should be realistic and align and make sure that they are attainable, for the students, right? Outcomes need to be designed with student ability in mind. Their initial skill sets, their cognitive development, wherever they are, and the length of your institutional time frame. So this could be a week that you're doing a training, right, with teachers or your employees. This could be a semester that you're doing a whole unit. This could be maybe a 3-week unit. You want to make sure that the time frame, cognitive development, skill sets, ability are all designated to attain the skill set that they should reach at the end. Now, they want to also align with the material for teaching, right? So make sure that they're curriculum aligned as well. You want to develop learning outcomes that are consistent with the curriculum objectives within the program. You also want to note that it is important when interpreting the results of any assessments that you are analyzing where changes in instruction should be made, right? These assessments are not just informing you where students are at, but it's also informing you where you might need to cover something else again, maybe pull back, take a step back and review what comes before that topic. Curriculum mapping is one example of an effective way that you can ensure chosen learning outcomes correspond to the curriculum. We're going to get into a curriculum map, but it's essentially a diagram that is explaining which learning outcomes are plotted against specific program courses. It's going to help ensure that your goals are reached in a timely manner. All right, now what should our learning objectives look like? First, you want to make sure that they are student-centered. And I'll also, give you a sentence stem to work with. But you want to write objectives that are student-centered. It should describe what students will know or be able to do, not what you will teach or cover. You want to make sure that they're active, right? So at the top, they need to be student-centered first and foremost. Student-centered that are active, right? They show what participants are able to do as a result of what they're learning. You want to make sure they're observable. Visible behavior not inward states of understanding. It should never read that by the end of this course, students should understand, because you can't necessarily gauge understanding. Understanding is internal. Lastly, they should be specific. So your activities or knowledge that the participants are gaining from the course need to be listed very specifically, but they should not be overly broad or too narrow in scope, right? So when you're articulating your objectives, you want to think about the following. What are the key points of the course? What are essential skills or pieces of knowledge for your field or subject, right? Do you need familiarity with certain terminology or methodology or building certain experiences? What do you want your students to remember? And then what practical skills do you want your students to gain? You want to consider these questions as you are designing your learning outcomes. Now, a sentence stem that you could use is by the end of this course. All right. Okay, there we go. Sorry. All right. So we are now thinking about the methods we are going to use for constructing learning outcomes. Sorry, there was a break in my recording. I had to tend to something, but continuing on, methods for constructing your learning outcomes. You could implement taxonomies. Now, taxonomies are learning experiences and student outcomes, which are useful outlines for developing thorough, insightful lists of student outcomes. This is also something that could align with a positivist view, right? So taxonomies classify and compartmentalize the different types of learning. They usually follow a structure that divides learning into 3 categories. The first being the cognitive domain. And the cognitive domain has 6 levels, ranging from simple recall and recognition of facts as the lowest level, up to increasingly more complex and abstract mental levels, like followed by the highest order, which is classified as evaluation. The second domain is the affective domain, right? So this involves our feelings, emotions, attitudes. This domain usually includes the ways in which humans deal with things emotionally, like their feelings, their values, their appreciation, enthusiasm, motivations, and attitudes. The final domain is going to be your psychomotor domain. This domain is going to refer to the motor skills that learners are expected to have acquired and mastered at each stage of development, right? You could also use a curriculum map, which we mentioned earlier. Now, curriculum maps, once learning objectives have been developed and approved, you want to make use of a curriculum map by viewing how the outcomes develop and are being met in each course. Now, that use of a curriculum map is a pretty straightforward way to visualize the ways in which you or the institution can list the learning outcomes. You use your rows. Here we go. You use your rows and columns to help you with visualizing outcomes in the rows, and then the program course in the columns. You can also use the different topics, right, that you are going to cover in a unit. Now, you can use the letters I, R, E to identify which courses in the program introduce, reinforce, or emphasize the corresponding learning outcomes. If you put a curriculum map into place, it can help you watch for unnecessary redundancies, inconsistencies, misalignments, weaknesses, and gaps in your learning outcomes so that you can optimize them for student success. Now, your power verbs. Use of power verbs when constructing learning outcomes is very important because it is going to help you create concrete, actionable words that are able to describe and quantify the specific action that is observable in measurement, which you need. What are the key points of the course? What are essential skills or pieces of knowledge for your field or subject? What do you want your students to remember? What practical skills do you want students to gain? These are all questions to consider as you are creating your power verbs. This is just an example, some examples of weak and strong objectives. Now, a weak objective would be that this course will cover how to generate, evaluate, and document design decisions, right? But a strong objective will be that by the end of this course, students will be able to generate, evaluate, and document design decisions, right? Not what the course is going to cover, but rather what the students will be able to do. Another weak objective. By the end of this module, students will learn how cultures explain and treat illnesses differently. But to make this a strong objective, you want to say that by the end of the module, they will be able to document, right? Because we're using our verbs, our power verbs. They're able to document how cultures explain and treat illness differently. Similar to the next one, this objective is going to say what students will be able to understand. We remember understand is an inward condition, so we cannot measure that. Instead, you want to say that they're able to discuss, show their understanding through discussion of the political, economic, and social causes of the Six-Day War. Lastly, by the end of this course, students will be able to perform the duties of a nurse practitioner. To make this stronger, you want to say that they will be able to interpret a patient's medical history, because this is the actual duty, right? This is actually too generic in general, very broad in scope. This is going to say what is one thing that they're going to be able to do, one skill that they need to be able to show, and that is the interpretation of a patient's medical history. Tips for writing your learning objectives, right? These are some of the different categories in which our power verbs might fall under. Under remembering, right? These are some of the inward words that we might use to describe: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. These are some of the power verbs that can help you push those into stronger objectives. So instead of remembering, you want them to be able to define or identify or list or state or reproduce. Instead of understanding, you might want them to classify or indicate or match or select or summarize, right? Something that they have to produce. Apply, examine, generalize, illustrate, record. To analyze, you might have them compare, contrast, differentiate, discriminate, examine. When they're evaluating, you might want them to argue something, critique it, defend it, evaluate it, judge it. If they're creating something, you might want them to construct something, design something, formulate something, hypothesize, or plan. For example, for this workshop, the objective at the end of this workshop is that you will be able to design your own curriculum. Give me 1 second, let me pause. All right, now it's time for you to begin developing and planning your unit. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to start before your unit begins. You want to determine your vision and intention for the curriculum, right? So you can stop here, take 30 minutes to sketch it out, and create a basic template that you're going to use throughout the process. You want to consider the following questions. What will it look like? How long will it take? What will your curriculum be used for? How do you want your unit to flow? Does this design accurately and clearly reflect the learning intentions for your students? And does this unit inspire your students to personally, academically, socially, or even professionally grow? Now you can stop here, pause your video, and go ahead and take 30 minutes to do this. All right, the next step is going to be for you to outline your overarching topics. These topics are going to provide you with a lot of flexibility within the context of your curriculum, right? You may need that, or you may want more structure. Either way is fine. You just need to figure out what those topics are and then write them down. So if I was to pick the overarching topics in a unit, say I was using some standards actually take care of that for you, like Common Core. They already have topics broken into like operations and algebraic functions, or writing mechanics, right? So similarly, something like the National Art Standards also have topics to explore, like organize and develop artistic ideas and work. So you can use these as your basic outline. You can use something totally different. If I'm thinking of a summer reading curriculum, I can choose to focus my middle schoolers on identity exploration, right? We want to have questions that guide us. These topics are going to provide you with that opportunity, right? So first you want to consider, what are your overarching topics, or what is your overarching topic? And then which topics can be priorities, which can be spiraled into the content. How can you organize this curriculum to fully address the content? And then will this topic connect with them on any level? Them being your students, your learners. Next, what you want to do for step 3 is to review any current curriculum to determine what to keep and what to retire. So you want to look at what you already have and whether or not you can throw it away. There's nothing worse than throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we tend to do that when we write curriculum. We throw out the old, start fresh. While it sometimes can be appropriate, more than often, we have some stellar lessons, units, or past practices that we can probably carry over. Maybe not the whole thing, but there might be some things. So look at what you already have. If you keep it, you want to figure out what topic it goes under and how you can naturally weave it in as part of the new curriculum. If it goes, then you need to write down what standards or ideas it was teaching so that you can fill that gap later on. From there, you're going to determine when you want to focus on each topic. Remember that most topics will be spiraled throughout the curriculum, but there are certainly time periods where you'll focus on a topic more deeply, right? Identify those time periods as an overview to your curriculum. You want to point that out. You want to consider the following questions. What kind of flexibility do I have? What should I keep? What should or can I revise? What should or can I toss? And then will the unit still challenge my students? Will it still challenge whoever your learners are? The last step is going to be for you to organize your standards based on the topics and the timeline. So now that you have your basic framework with topics and an overarching timeline of when you're going to focus on each topic, you want to fill in those standards. Look at the standards that you need to teach in your curriculum and then determine where they will best fit into your topic overview. So again, you have topics that will come back and spiral, right? So you have a little leeway here, but this is going to help ensure that you teach all the standards required for your content and that they are taught when most appropriate. So it's also going to provide you with an opportunity for integration since you're reorganizing these standards by topic. So you want to take a look at the other content areas and media and art areas to see if there are any standards that make a natural alignment with any of yours. If so, highlight that in your framework, save a spot for an integrated lesson. And that's going to help ensure that your curriculum is engaging and meaningful for your learners. Questions to consider. Do you have standards to abide by? What individual standards will you include and why? Can you begin to see, how these standards will be taught in context with your unit? And are all of your standards included in the most natural topic areas? Now, once you've finished designing, you want to move on to this step for your learning objectives. 2 steps we are going to focus on before your lesson. The first step is to state your learning objectives for all of your lessons. So you're going to draft statements. Remember, we're using 3 to 5 statements. You can use the taxonomy framework. You can use the curriculum map. Make sure that you take use of those power verbs. The next step, you're going to say how you will ensure your students will learn material that is meaningful and purposeful. So add real-time advancements or current related news that could be using material from prerequisite courses or units as a jumping off point. That can mean getting feedback from your peers, instructor, TA, colleagues, or administration on how your presentation looks before your unit begins. So after you have created your topics, found your overarching topic, created your framework, you're going to start to think about your learning objectives. And this will close us out for the first part of our curriculum design workshop. When you all come to class for the next meeting, please bring 3 pieces of media, that could be articles, videos, photos, that you find crucial to your curriculum learning objectives. All right, this will be very, very important for the second part of our workshop. you guys have any questions between now and the next class, please don't hesitate to shoot me a message on Canvas, and I will try to get back to each of you.